Mr. President, I'm going to speak on two topics. First, what's happening in my hometown of New York, and then second, what's going on over there in the House of Representatives. So, Mr. President, as we speak, my hometown of New York is experiencing some of the most frightening rainfall and flooding we've seen since Hurricane Sandy. About a month's worth of rain has inundated Brooklyn in just a matter of hours, and some parts of the city have experienced up to 5 inches of rain. Flash floods remain in effect for Manhattan, for Queens, for Brooklyn. And we're not through the danger yet. Another powerful storm is expected over the next day, and the situation remains dangerous. I'll continue closely monitoring the otherworldly flooding we're seeing in New York. A little while ago, I spoke to the governor to tell her that I will do everything on the federal level to get New York the help it needs. Earlier today, I sent a letter to FEMA, and a few minutes ago spoke to the FEMA administrator, telling her New York needs help. FEMA has promised me 2 things. 1, to deal with the immediate effects of the flood, any equipment and other types of resources they need. And second, later, to provide resources New Yorkers will need to rebuild and recover. And here in the Senate, I will work to secure any federal assistance possible to fund relief efforts and aid those who need to rebuild from the flood damage. Again, I cannot stress enough that we are not through these storms just yet. Everyone, please follow emergency guidance and stay safe. Now on the CR and the shutdown. We stand now at the precipice of an unnecessary, reckless, and entirely Republican-manufactured shutdown. In less than 48 hours, funding that pays the salaries of our troops for border enforcement, for TSA operations, nutrition programs, food inspections, all will come to a halt. As I've said for months, Congress has only one option to avoid a shutdown: bipartisanship. We needed bipartisanship yesterday, we need it today, we will need it tomorrow. It's true. Today, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But in the House, sadly, unlike the Senate, we have not seen bipartisanship. We have only seen chaos. We have only seen paralysis. A few hours ago, Speaker McCarthy held a vote on a truly radical CR proposal everyone knew never stood a chance of passing the Senate. And now, the House Republican CR has failed to even pass the House by an unexpectedly large and decisive margin, 34 votes, much more than most expected. The Speaker has spent weeks catering to the hard right, and now he finds himself in the exact same position he's been in since the beginning. No plan forward, no closer to passing something that avoids a shutdown. The Speaker needs to abandon his doomed mission of trying to please MAGA extremists, and instead, he needs to work across the aisle to keep the government open. Things seem to be getting worse for the Speaker rather than better, and it's time for him to try bipartisanship. Here in the Senate, bipartisanship is precisely what we are pursuing by working on our CR. Just yesterday, I'm proud to say, 76 senators vote in favor of the proceeding to the CR. I salute not only Chairman Murray, but Ranking Member Collins and Leader McConnell, and the so many others on the other side of the aisle who joined us in moving forward. We will continue working on the CR over the course of today and see if we can find some agreement to pass it quickly. And I note that these 76 senators voted in favor of proceeding to the CR, even as we work through debates about final content of the bill. That's what bipartisanship means. Not that we agree on everything, but that disagreements do not paralyze the process. And when the Senate finishes its work, it is imperative the House move on a Senate-passed bipartisan CR. It'll be our last chance to ensuring that a shutdown is avoided. Any more time the Speaker spends trying to cobble together hard-right wish lists that can't even pass the House would be a grievous mistake. So to Speaker McCarthy, let me be clear. If you don't want our troops to go without pay, work in a bipartisan way. If you don't want to see border funding endangered, work in a bipartisan way. If you don't want to see seniors lose access to Meals on Wheels or cuts to nutrition for women, infants, and children, or holds on small business loans, work in a bipartisan way. At the end of the day, these MAGA extremists, who are the ones responsible for bringing us to the brink, fundamentally do not care about funding the government. Some of them are actually gleeful about a shutdown. Coddling the hard right is as futile as trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. And the harder the Speaker tries, the bigger mess he makes. And that mess is going to hurt the American people the most. I hope the Speaker snaps out of the vice's grip he's put himself in and stops succumbing to the 30 or so extremists who are running the show in the House. Mr. Speaker, time has almost run out. Yield the floor.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I know there are others that are waiting to speak, and I will yield to them momentarily. But I think it's important that the Majority Leader explain the entire story of where we find ourselves here today on the verge of a shutdown. The truth is the Senate has not passed a Senate single appropriations bill that passed out of the Senate Appropriations Committee by bipartisan support. Some of them were passed unanimously. The first bill, I believe, that passed out of the Senate Appropriations Committee passed out some 80 days ago. Now, it may have taken until the end of July before we could get a House bill to then amend, which is a necessary procedural prerequisite. But the fact of the matter is, the Majority Leader, who's the only person who can schedule a vote on any of these pieces of legislation, has failed to bring any of these bills to the floor and successfully pass the United States Senate. So 18 days before the end of the fiscal year, which is the shutdown unless we pass another funding bill, the Majority Leader puts a so-called minibus, or a combination of 3 appropriation bills on the floor. That was the first time the Majority Leader decided to actually schedule a vote on anything. My point is that the Majority Leader likes to blame the House, and particularly because it's a majority Republicans. So he acts like this is all their fault. Everything's just hunky-dory and bipartisan in the Senate. That's false. The Majority Leader has contributed dramatically to this shutdown because of the Senate's failure under his leadership to pass any appropriation bills whatsoever. And yes, it's no surprise to anybody that here we are needing to find some way forward on a continuing resolution. In other words, to keep the lights on while we continue to work out other differences. I think shutdowns are a mistake. Shutdowns are a mistake because they don't solve the underlying problem. They disrupt all sorts of people, and he mentioned some of the people they disrupt, including paid or military. Our own staff aren't going to get paid. People aren't going to get able to get passports through the passport office, or they got immigration problems, or if a veteran's worried about getting compensation or other benefits, they're not going to be responded to because of this government shutdown. Completely predictable and completely unnecessary. So I think if you're going to talk about who contributed to where we are today, the Majority Leader, I say this respectfully, this is in large part a Schumer shutdown because the Senate hadn't done its job. This is not governing. This is not responsible. And again, the only way we can consider legislation in the United States Senate is if he schedules something on the floor. That's his prerogative as a Majority Leader. But people ought to be held accountable. People ought to be responsible for their own actions. And the Majority Leader has simply failed to let the Senate do its work even though the Senate Appropriations Committee, which is chaired by a Democrat, Senator Patty Murray, ranking member Senator Susan Collins, they did magnificent work. They did what they were supposed to do. But because the majority leader failed to bring any of those bills before the floor, we haven't passed a single appropriation bill, and we're looking at a deadline of midnight Saturday where the government ceases to function because of the failure to do our job here in the Senate. The House has its own problems, but we ought to take care of business here.